Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Windows on the World. Yes, a follow-up tonight to the shows that we've been doing most recently, including, of course, last week's show, COVID, Puppets and Protest. I did a show with Kieran Boyle during the week on Wednesday, and we looked at the difference in tactics between mainland in the UK and in Ireland. Quite interesting, actually, because obviously the whole point of the directed protests in the UK is to control and manage the protest for the COVID action plan. We went through that quite thoroughly last week. But it's interesting that in the Daily Mail, there was a story. It says, suspended nurse who compared public health restrictions to the Holocaust becomes the new face of anti-vax hysteria. Well, all the key words are in there, aren't they? And it says that this woman is going to host a rally in Trafalgar Square next Saturday. Now, isn't that strange? Because protests are banned, aren't they? So why on earth would the state be enabling a protest to happen in Trafalgar Square? Well, there's also a bit of irony here, because I don't know whether you knew this, everybody, but Trafalgar Square is one of the main areas where unlicensed 5G is being used. In actual fact, it looks very much as it's the police and security service are using unlicensed 5G in Trafalgar Square. You can look at this article, actually. It's quite an interesting one, and it's called silverseema.com news. That's the website, Silverseema, rather, Siversima, that's the company.com. 2019 was the breakthrough year in Europe for 60 gigahertz unlicensed 5G. And part of the article says this decision has led to the rollout of unlicensed 5G, which has started in the EU, with the award-winning MetNet self-organising SON technology from CCS Cambridge Communication Systems getting to the market with full certification in both the US and Europe. And then it asks a question. It says, disruptive, ? Yes, that is the least you can say. It's called disruptive technology, you see. A recent Freedom of Information request to the Department Office of Communications said, this is from your website dated the 8th of November 2018. You state that there is no need for a company to obtain a license in order to use the 60 gigahertz part of the spectrum for 5G and other purposes. This is a radically different type of radiation to 2G, 3, 4G or Wi-Fi. Question, what independent safety testing has been done on long-term, i.e. years rather than hours, exposure to this wavelength? 2. Has safety testing been done on this wavelength in conjunction with the existing 2, 3, 4G and Wi-Fi exposures to which people are already exposed? And then there's the name of the person who wrote it, who's called J.M. Wanzia. Of course, the reply was quite predictable. It said, Public Health England's advice is that no negative effects on public health are anticipated with 5G. Not so cleverly avoiding the question there. And that's a big part of what we're in, a mimetic warfare strategy. In other words, what we are up against is a limited vocabulary that is used to subvert us. Yes, so the systems rollout is out of sync in the COVID action plan, very interestingly, because of what's happening in the news. The way it's been rolled out is very clumsy and it doesn't make sense. Yes, I think I described it recently as a B-movie with no plot. COVID-19 is a B-movie with absolutely no plot whatsoever. They make it up as they go along, or they appear to. What, in effect, I think is actually happening is that the rollout is not ready. I don't think that the global health system and all the rest of it, all the systems that are running alongside this COVID action plan, which we've been talking about through the World Economic Forum and the people who are rolling it out, all the corporations, the corporate infrastructure, I don't think it's actually quite ready for what they're doing, and it's a little bit chaotic. That seems to be what's going on. That's an assumption, but what is going on is confusing, and of course we talked about how it was being controlled, gatekept and managed in last week's show and in some recent shows. Please tune in to RBN, which is Republic Broadcasting Network. We're on there every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. UK time. And I have guests on those shows, and we're getting to some very interesting areas. But yes, let's have a look what it says on the BBC website now. What can police do if I meet more than 6 friends? From Monday the 14th of September, indoor and outdoor social gatherings of more than 6 people will be banned in England. There are exceptions for workplaces, schools and occasions like weddings and funerals. The government is due to outline any further exemptions. It says, what are the new rules for meeting my friends? The new rules narrow the gap between non-enforceable coronavirus guidelines currently in place and the law. For example, current guidelines say outdoor gatherings larger than 6 should only take place if everyone is from 2 households. However, police are only able to disperse and fine people if the group is larger than 30. The new rules will be backed by law, so police can take action if you are in a group of more than 6. So how are these protests going to actually materialise in Trafalgar Square? And why are they being advertised in the Daily Mail? Surely they would want people to keep away from Trafalgar Square. They wouldn't want more than 6 people congregating, would they? Unless, of course, it was absolutely necessary. Well, maybe it is necessary because protest, as we have described in the past, is part of the system. You cannot have a system enforced without an apparent resistance, but that resistance has to be marginalised and made to look stupid, which is actually happening. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Read that Daily Mail article from the 12th of September. All about what's happening on the 19th of September in Trafalgar Square. And then think about the rollout of 60 gigahertz 5G in Trafalgar Square, which is being used by MetNet, which obviously sounds very much like we are an intelligence gathering kind of part of the global health system, which is being rolled out. Yeah, so COVID Protest and Puppets was our last show, and I did one with Kieran Boyle from Ireland on Wednesday, and that's really good. I think he called it How to Organise a Protest or something like that, and it's on Alternative News, which is his YouTube channel while it's still there. And we talked about strategy. Strategy with this is the important thing. And of course, protesting is not strategy. That is going up directly against the system. And we've had this person saying, choose your side along with a lot of these other groups so that they are antagonising the police to take action. And then we've heard today from someone in chat, I think it's Matt, said in chat at windowsontheworld.net that this person who's organising this rally on the 19th has actually said the police are our enemies. I haven't actually seen the direct reference to that, but it all fits because when you look at controlled opposition protest, it has to be confrontational. Okay, so it really doesn't matter whether this is by design or that those organising the actual event have been compromised. It doesn't really matter whether it's by intent or design. The result is the same. We have this a lot. Useful idiots can work for the council. They may not know they're useful idiots. Useful idiots organise protests. They may not know they're useful idiots. But sometimes they do know they're useful idiots. And in the past, I've actually been able to uncover and document these people. And what happens with these people is they come from nowhere, they become very popular, and they seem to get a lot of followers. They absolutely discredit the issue, and then they disappear again. So let's see what happens over the next couple of weeks. Interesting times. Yes, the main point is that as we are saying, that all forms of protests are written into the system. So joining one means that you are enabling the state. And we don't want to do that, do we? We don't want to enable the COVID action plan. It's a bit tedious. The idiots who put themselves in charge, though, do not realise this. That is why the state enables them. In the case of the ongoing anti-lockdown efforts, the watering down and infiltration with side issues and distraction is now completely absorbed. The legal aspect is now being sidetracked. That's what we talked about in our last show, COVID, Puppets and Protest. Do have a listen, because I went into all of the agencies that are around the protest movements and how they are interlinked to the intelligence services. So there's no protest allowed in the UK if it is not being allowed by the intelligence services. Also, there would be no protest advertised in the Daily Mail in a time when more than 6 people can be arrested if it wasn't in the state's interest to do so. So interesting times, definitely interesting times, but times when people, or the people that matter, need to think and actually think about strategy. The legal aspect, though, is being sidetracked with gatekeeping groups who spin nonsense which leads nowhere. And we've seen a few of those attached to this so-called protest. Yes, all about the fact that you've got a birth certificate and all the stuff that we knew already, which is going to be a distraction. They use that now. The state have been using this in the courts as a distraction since 2010. Indeed, documents were circulated to every court in the country about the so-called free man on the land movement, and it is now the fastest way of losing a case unless you know what you're doing, and not many do. The whole psychological operation of COVID, though, is all there is. It is not about anything else. It's a psychological operation we're in. It certainly now has nothing to do with the cover story, which disintegrated a long time ago. The whole point is that now it is necessary to avoid the madness of crowds and create new infrastructure and ways to live free of the COVID conspiracy. The excuses for the psychological warfare are so daft and the intention behind the scam so clear that it is no longer necessary to engage with it. That's what we've been talking about in some of our recent shows, new strategies. Yeah, the whole issue is now about how to get by without it. How do you live outside the COVID scam? Well, in actual fact, it's not that difficult, and with a little bit of organisation up and down the country, we're starting to get strategies emerging. Very interesting conversations I've been having recently with people who've got their heads screwed on. I'm glad there's still some of them left. The poisoning by the ringleaders, though, of the predictable protest is now complete, with the Daily Mail promoting their useful idiot who will now be used to ridicule through all the media. The narcissism of the useful idiots has meant that they have missed the main point, which is to make sure that they have bulletproof arguments. Rhetoric fails at all times when the shouting match begins, and that is the big problem. The global health security system is what none of the useful idiots are talking about, so they might as well be protesting against the distraction issues, which in fact they are. Under the cover of COVID-19, the new system is being put into place, and all the testing, biometric ID rollout and COVID passports are a messy front end to the data gathering being done through the COVID scam. We've done quite a lot of shows on this. I find it a very interesting area, this whole idea of the systems and the gaming systems which are basically being imposed over the top of it. We talked about that on last Thursday's show, I think, with Vicky Davis, who used to work on IBM computer systems. And she was saying that what they're doing now with the smart cities and the resilient cities rollout is actually using it as a computer model template, as a computer game. So they're turning smart cities into a gaming environment. And this goes into the global health system also. Now, the thing is with all this is how effective really is it? Well, that depends upon the participation of those within it. Think about that. Think about unpredictability. Think about doing something which is not expected. Think about working under the radar. Think about not being able to be part of the statistics of artificial intelligence and the algorithmic methods of measurement. It's really interesting stuff, this now, I think. But the corporate greed is fueling the fourth industrial revolution. The biometric industry really is riding the wave of COVID-19. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced ambitious plans for millions of people to be tested for coronavirus every day in what we reported on last week is called Operation Moonshot, the Moonshot approach. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because according to the intelligence services of the UK through Hope Not Hate, if you start questioning the moon landings, the next thing is you're going to be radicalised into the far right. And that's just by listening to this show. So they don't really have much idea of what we're doing in actual fact, because they're part of a computer rollout. That's all they are. These people are artificial intelligence. They haven't got intelligence. So therefore, they have to go with the hierarchical structure in which they work. Yeah, interesting. GSK, AstraZeneca, Serco and G4S to help carry out the proposals, it says here. This is, of course, the rollout of the vaccination and all the infrastructure around it. But some scientists have already expressed doubts. It says, while a memo published by the government's scientific advisory group, SAGE, last week warned mass testing could lead to an increased number of false positive tests. Well, I think we know about that, and that's the whole point. It's the false positives that are actually making it up, because the whole thing's died on its arse and disappeared if you actually look at the real figures. And on it goes. On last week's show, we covered the Resilient Cities Network. This is really interesting stuff, which is now being run by the Institute of Strategic Dialogue. The Institute of Strategic Dialogue is a think tank which talks about the dangers of radicalisation within the big society, also known as your community, which of course it isn't. Now it's interesting because they work alongside an institution like let's say the Institute of Statecraft with their Integrity Initiative, which was uncovered by MP Chris Williamson, and he went knocking on their door, which was slammed in his face in the City of London. These are the people who are basically saying that Russia did it, which if you turn on LBC and listen to the compromised MI5 agent, Majid Nawaz, you will hear him spouting this MI5 rhetoric about radicalisation into the far right, and it all comes from these think tanks. So basically, well, he's part of a think tank called Quilliam, which is really actually funded by the usual suspects. So do look into that. Interesting about Majid Nawaz is that he was meant to be some kind of radicalised terrorist, but his family actually disagree with that. And the incident which states that he got put onto the radar for radicalisation, where he said he would explode a backpack, has been absolutely refuted by his own family, whose family members were actually there. It was actually an argument between two rival factions about somebody's girlfriend. So there you go. That's how British intelligence works. Not very intelligently, but they are at least persistent. So yeah, the Strong Cities Network, which is part of this Resilient Cities Network. It's really interesting. So we have this Institute of Strategic Dialogue, which produced these papers on radicalisation, which really all talk about things like the far right and how we discuss certain things. So they don't actually go into the information about these issues. What they actually do is they frame the argument. In other words, they frame what we can talk about and what we can't talk about. So they're nothing to do with actually getting any information out. They're actually about covering up information, which they do really badly. I've gone through many of their papers and they're just rubbish. They have these people from Demos, actually, we debated with them years ago. This was on last week's show, but it's worth another rollout of their quote. The new democracy, so in the UK, the new democracy will work with a combination of government, open, infiltration, and citizens groups taking direct action. So the citizens groups taking direct action, well, it doesn't matter whether it's Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion, or even the People's Assembly. They're all created for you. So it's interesting that we now have an anti-COVID demonstration, which has been created for us by the state. God, anyone would think there's a big conspiracy going on. But yeah, it says here, the Strong Cities Network. Let's get on to the Strong Cities Network. Is an initiate of London-based think tank, the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, whose mission statement is to power solutions to extremism and polarisation. Well, how do you do that? How do you power solutions to extremism and polarisation? You invent the extremism and then you increase the polarisation. So in other words, when you say choose your side, that's called polarisation. That's driving two sides apart. It could be the police and the public. It's obviously the state and the public, and it could be factions within one group. So in other words, we've got the anti-5G protesters and we've got the COVID protesters, but they don't agree on everything. So let's drive them further apart. We've got the free men on the land lot. So let's drive them further apart. Let's create conflict. Let's create what is called the 4Ds. Degrade, disrupt, deceive. There's another one actually. I was looking at a video the other day that I did with David Shaler years ago. Now, David, of course, resigned from MI5 years ago over this plot to kill Colonel Gaddafi in the 90s, which went horribly wrong, and 20 British intelligence personnel were killed by his guards. And there was no need to take Gaddafi out, of course, as there is no need to take any of these people out unless, of course, they're not part of the Global Action Plan, and then, of course, they have to. So it's all very interesting because what we're seeing here is just the big society. This is all part of the big society. It doesn't matter whether it's taking out a leader. It doesn't matter whether it's organised a protest for you. It doesn't matter whether it's rolling out the computer modelling systems and the global health system. It's all part of the big society and the new world system. So, yeah, interesting stuff. Isn't that interesting? Yes, it is. How did that become part of the infrastructure? In other words, how did this Institute of Strategic Dialogue become part of the structure of a strong cities network? And of course, we've got lots of cities signed up to this. I think there's nearly 100, about 98 in all, I think. And of course, Glasgow is one of them, and I think London is too. So just have a look through it. I was looking the other week. I think I've got a note with it all in, but deny, degrade, deceive, disrupt, deny, degrade, and deceive. It's come back to me. Deny, disrupt, degrade, and deceive. Think about that. Think about the 4Ds. Those are the 4Ds of the intelligence services, which were actually released on a slideshow about 10 years ago. And it showed a fellow with his head in his hands, basically having his head done in through psychological warfare, conflicting information, and being targeted. And anybody who is doing anything in this country which is in any way useful and is not part of the new global system will be targeted. They will not be promoted. I do know this from personal experience, and those that get promoted are being promoted for a very good reason. Yes, they turn up, they do their job, and then they disappear again. Some of them actually come back. Some of them have been around a long time, and they are so obvious in what they are doing. But because they are there all the time, then the public get to meet them. If they go to, say, well, remember the days when there were music festivals? Well, a lot of these people go to all these different music festivals. Music festivals are also part of ID 2020 and all the rest of it, because we had that with the whole inclusion of all music festivals into sustainable development. And of course, a lot of the people who put these events on are pretty gullible. They're fake greens and they're virtue signalers. Very easy to control them. But the big communitarian society is the real virus, the virus of the mind, managed by artificial intelligence. The problem is it doesn't work. The level of compliance needed, though, for this system has to be absolute. In other words, no one will be left behind. We've heard people like Klaus Schwab saying this, Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. I've got the quotes. Have a look at some of those recent articles at windowsontheworld.net, and fascinating stuff once you get your teeth into it. The overarching surveillance, real-time computer game has to be operated by those who have a narrow view of everything. The narrow view is being promoted by the likes of the Institute of Strategic Dialogue and the language of the fully neutered communitarian, who is the same wherever he or she goes or comes from. This is merely, when it comes down to it, a vocabulary war. If we have a bigger vocabulary and better abilities to frame an argument focused on fact, this approach to restrict expression falls down. The real battle, then, is in the memes of the times. So, let's have a look now at resilient cities, because we're talking now about the crossover of intelligence and the controlling of infrastructure. This all goes into this gaming model. And it's not something I can say I fully understand, but I have a good overview of, because I've spoken to people who do understand it, and my view runs alongside theirs. So in other words, once you start thinking a bit bigger and you start thinking above the actual stuff that's being promoted to the public, and look what it's really about. Look what COVID-19 really is about. And it's about this. It's nothing to do with the virus, obviously, but it is a lot to do with a mind virus. So yes, The real battle is in the memes of the times, and winning the memetic warfare is key, and it can be done. I really do sincerely believe this. But there are, yes, as I said, nearly 100 resilient cities. The Global Resilient Cities Network has announced the launch of a global coalition to help mobilise collective action. Everything's about collectivism. No one will be left behind, with the goal of achieving a better day after the COVID-19 pandemic ends. Now, the day after, that sounds like a post-apocalyptic sci-fi movie. Well, we're in one, aren't we? The problem that we have with COVID-19 is if you took it as a script, the way it's been played out, to a producer, they would say, I would recommend many rewrites, and I would also recommend you start looking at the plot and put a subplot in as well, and get some interesting characters, because you haven't got any. That's the way COVID-19 is being played out. It's been played out without a plot. So it says, cities for a resilient recovery seek to support cities to strengthen the resilience of their city systems and, wait for it, it does actually say it, leave no one behind as they stand on the front line of COVID-19. It's called Resilient Recovery, you see. Laura Sorkin, acting director of GRCN, which is this city's network, said that while cities are working to respond to this pandemic, there is also an overwhelming demand from cities to work together on a resilient recovery and to fix the broken systems that exacerbated the impacts of the virus on our vulnerable communities, which of course means the new global health security system. Those trained in sustainable word salads, though, are not very intelligent. They have little vocabulary and just the sound bites used by every organisation in the global network. In other words, once you know this limited vocabulary, vibrant, diverse, etc., resilient, all the rest of it, once you know what it actually means and how they're using it, it can be usurped to our advantage. In other words, those with a functioning brain cell left. It says here, the members of the Global Resilient Cities Network trust one another's knowledge and experience, and we are committed to making this available to address the complex challenges of COVID-19, the resilience challenge of our generation. You see, it's not about a virus, it's about a mind virus, the resilience challenge of our generation. The C2R initiatives offers a participatory platform to all interested cities, including the 98 members so far and other urban centres that are willing to engage in short and long-term planning for sustained resilient recovery, the smart city computer game, which is going to control everything in real time, they think. The principle of a resilient recovery, it says, is simple. As we rebuild from the current crisis, we must also prepare for future shocks. Wasn't that a book by Alvin Toffler? In the 70s, it was all about the forthcoming traumas that were going to be inflicted, I believe, on the human race to get them to actually be steered into certain agendas and outcomes. I think so. These are media-driven, though. COVID is a media operation in the main. It is 80% psychological operation and 20% absolute nonsense. The war is on the mind. Both COVID and climate change are massive challenges that require transformative solutions on a global scale, commented Janie Bavishi, director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Resiliency. Yeah, there's an Office of Resiliency, not resilience, it's called resiliency. So you can see where these people are coming from, can't you? They speak a narrow language. They work in a hierarchical society structure, and they are all programmed drones, and they are basically little more than artificial intelligence. What does that tell you? If you have intelligence, you can see through this. If you have intelligence, you can impose a new strategy. You can make them thinking that you're going in one direction and then just go in the other direction. Could be fun anyway, couldn't it? So the main drivers are the climate change apocalypse, which is presented as a religion, and the fear, of course, at the moment of pandemics. Now, all this was written down in psychological warfare documents and think tanks over the last 100 years. But it's interesting, actually, because recently Ireland introduced COVID passports, and they got absolutely slated online. 94% of COVID deaths had other causes of death. That's a mainstream headline. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? And when it comes down to it, the propaganda is the key. And the propaganda isn't really working on the COVID action plan side. The propaganda is actually backfiring, and there are the chinks in the armour, you see. That's how you get in, because it's backfiring. When it's backfiring, you go into counterattack. The use of it needs to be finely tuned for maximum effect. That's the thing with propaganda. How to fight fake news. That's the key. The presentation of facts is so important to counter the lies and spin of all media. And simplicity is the key. Edit it down, keep refining your ideas. Sound bites have to be used to explain all in the easiest terms possible. The need to publicly demonstrate a counter-opinion to that of the simple propaganda being pushed from all directions is absolutely paramount. In other words, if you're going to go public and you can't argue, don't go public. Don't be a narcissist, don't be a time waster, and don't be a useful idiot. I made this point in a recent show, and the refining of strategy may have unexpected results, and any result will have to come from unpredictability. Remember, by way of deception, they wage war. This is not anything like an even playing field. It is stacked in favour of the totalitarians to such a degree that only careful strategy can win through. The fake news media will choose people who are easy to demonise, and there are plenty of them out there. In fact, the world is creating more entitled narcissists by the minute who are so easily disempowered they wouldn't even know it. So, those who have awareness and the ability to think ahead must be really full of hate in the simplified world of the change agent. Yes, diversity will be the death of us. Vibrant communities will be the end of all joy. Technocracy, COVID and ineffective intelligence. The Institute of Strategic Dialogue and its resilient cities also state the roles shared currently include not only more traditional police roles, such as surveillance, investigation, crowd control, prison escorts, court security, guarding and patrolling, but also proactive tasks such as crime prevention, risk management and assessment, and weapons training. So that is what resilient cities are all about. A corporate police state based on surveillance and monitoring in real time. A trained repeater states, and I think this is something to do with the mayor of Ottawa, Ottawa's strength lies in its diverse and vibrant community. You couldn't make it up, could you really? Well, they can't make it up, obviously, because they say the same thing over and over and over again. He said, I am proud to be working with various organisations and agencies on a city-wide plan to address hate and violence. By finding common ground instead of differences, we invite age, ethnicity, culture, religion, sexual orientation, abilities, values and beliefs to become the fabric of our city, unite rather than divide us. These people are mentally retarded. You'd have to be mentally retarded to spout this nonsense day in, day out. It says the roles shared currently include not only more traditional police roles, such as surveillance, investigation, crowd control, all the rest, high-tech systems development and monitoring, interviewing and offering communications support, as well as the above of what I've just said. So, the integration of the global system relies on artificial intelligence and real-time information gathering to form its reactions. So, in other words, if you don't do what they think you're going to do, then they've had it. That in itself will only work with a very dumb level of compliance, you see. A resurgence of thinking will help with what the World Economic Forum call strategic intelligence. So, everyone out there, please let's have some. And remember that going up against the locked gates of global governance deception will only result in exhaustion, defeat and death. For throwing insults and trifles at demons will bring the full force of their wrath. They will twist your words with theirs on every platform they own, and they own every platform. They will make the world turn against you as their lies are relentless and their legions many. Better to be strategic and have silver bullets in your armoury than let the demon win by deception. I actually wrote that, I think, for last week's show, or was it the week before? Everything's flying past so quickly. But basically, I've been working over the past week on this mimetic strategy. I will be having some meetings on it, no more than 6, of course, in the group. And yes, let's see how it all pans out. I'm going to be back on Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. on Republic Broadcasting Network. Do look at the website and go back into the back catalogue. We've got years of stuff, and it's never been more important than it is now, because everything we've talked about is related to the present moment. So, thanks a lot, everybody. I'm going to read what's in chat now, and be back next Sunday, of course, and Tuesday and Thursday during the week. Thanks for listening, and good night.